A glimpse into shadows. The night was calm, and the affluent suburban streets lay quiet under the soft embrace of streetlights. The hum of a sleek black Mercedes broke the silence, the faint purring of the engine complementing the tranquility rather than disrupting it. Marcus Daniels sat behind the wheel, his hands resting lightly on the leather steering wheel. His tailored navy blue suit remained pristine even after an exhausting day of endless meetings, heated negotiations, and meticulous contract reviews. The faint glimmer of his gold watch reflected the streetlights, a symbol of his success, though he wore it with humility. Marcus was no stranger to long days. As the director of one of the nation's most prestigious law firms, his life was a constant balancing act of power and principle. He had spent years climbing the ranks, not just for the luxury it afforded but because of the mission that had fueled him from the start, to fight against the very injustice that had haunted his childhood. Born and raised in a working-class neighborhood riddled with systemic inequality, Marcus had vowed never to forget his roots. Every win in the courtroom was a victory not just for his clients but for the communities he had sworn to protect. But success often painted a target on one's back. As he navigated the winding streets of the neighborhood, his mind replayed the events of the day. His team had made significant progress on a case that could expose a corrupt police department in a neighboring city. It was a delicate case, riddled with powerful enemies and dangerous truths. The implications were staggering. If successful, it would be a monumental blow to the culture of unchecked authority and racial profiling. Lost in thought, Marcus almost didn't notice the blue and red lights exploding in his rearview mirror. The sharp wail of a siren followed, cutting through the stillness of the night. His heart sank. Instinctively, he glanced at his speedometer. He wasn't speeding. He hadn't run a stop sign. There was no logical reason for this. Except Marcus knew that logic rarely played a role in encounters like these. Pulling to the side of the road, he adjusted his tie and took a deep breath. He had been here before, not in this exact situation, but in countless others that bore the same undertones. Stay calm. Stay compliant. Avoid sudden movements. The rules echoed in his mind as though they were second nature. Two white officers emerged from the patrol car behind him. Their body language was aggressive, their postures tense. The taller one approached first, his hand resting on the holster of his sidearm. The other circled around the Mercedes, his flashlight slicing through the interior as though searching for something preordained. License and registration, barked the taller officer, whose name tag read Dunham. He tapped on the driver's side window with the butt of his flashlight. His tone was clipped, gruff, and commanding. Marcus complied without hesitation, pressing the button to lower his window and handing over his documents. "Here you go, officer," he said evenly, keeping his tone polite yet firm. Years of courtroom battles had taught him to control his emotions, even under pressure. Dunham scrutinized the license, his expression unreadable. Meanwhile, the other officer, Rhodes, leaned closer, peering into the car with exaggerated thoroughness. His flashlight lingered on the leather seats, the polished dashboard, and finally the expensive briefcase sitting on the passenger seat. His lips curled into a sneer. "What's a guy like you doing in a neighborhood like this so late?" Rhodes asked, his tone dripping with suspicion. Marcus met his gaze without flinching. "I live in this area," he replied calmly. "Is there a problem, officers?" Dunham's lips twisted into a smirk. "We got a report of suspicious activity," he said, the words rolling off his tongue with rehearsed ease. "Step out of the car." Marcus hesitated. He knew his rights. He knew there was no probable cause for them to ask him to exit the vehicle. But he also knew that asserting those rights in this moment could escalate the situation in unpredictable and dangerous ways. With a measured exhale, he unlocked the door and stepped out, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. Rhodes wasted no time. As soon as Marcus was clear of the vehicle, Rhodes leaned inside, his flashlight darting over every surface. It didn't take long before he straightened up, holding a small plastic bag filled with white powder between two gloved fingers. A triumphant grin spread across his face. "Well, well," Rhodes said, his voice oozing smug satisfaction. "Looks like we've got ourselves a drug dealer." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. "That's not mine," he said firmly. "You know it's not mine." Dunham stepped closer, his smirk deepening. "Is that so?" he drawled. "Well, tell it to the judge." He reached for his handcuffs, and within moments, Marcus felt the cold steel clamp around his wrists. The indignity of the situation burned through him, but he refused to let it show. "You're making a mistake," Marcus said evenly, meeting Dunham's gaze with unshakable resolve. "I'm not who you think I am." Dunham chuckled, a low, condescending sound. "Oh, I think we know exactly who you are," he said. "You're just another punk who thinks he's above the law." As Marcus was led to the back of the patrol car, his mind raced. He had spent his career fighting cases like this, exposing corruption and defending the innocent. Now, he found himself on the other side of the equation. But unlike so many others who had been caught in this web of abuse, Marcus had the knowledge, the resources, and the determination to fight back. From the back seat of the patrol car, Marcus watched as Dunham and Rhodes exchanged smug glances. They thought they had won. They thought they had silenced another voice. What they didn't realize was that they had just set into motion a chain of events that would unravel their careers and expose a system they had long believed to be untouchable. As the car pulled away from the curb, Marcus's resolve hardened. He wasn't just going to clear his name. He was going to make sure that justice was served, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been wronged by the very people sworn to protect them. This was only the beginning. Seeds of resistance. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into Marcus Daniels' wrists as he sat in the back seat of the patrol car, the muted hum of the engine doing little to mask the officer's smug laughter. Officer Dunham glanced in the rearview mirror, his smirk growing wider as their eyes met. Marcus held his gaze, calm yet unyielding. He knew that this was more than a false arrest, it was an opportunity. As the car wound its way through darkened streets toward the police station, Marcus began to assess his options. Years of legal battles had honed his mind to work under pressure, and even now, his thoughts were methodical. This wasn't just about clearing his name, it was about dismantling the deeply rooted corruption that allowed officers like Dunham and Rhodes to operate unchecked. Marcus had spent a lifetime preparing for moments like this, and he knew that patience and strategy would be his greatest allies. The station loomed ahead, its harsh fluorescent lights cutting through the night like daggers. When the patrol car rolled to a stop, Dunham yanked the door open and pulled Marcus out with unnecessary force. Marcus stumbled slightly but quickly regained his balance, straightening his suit as best he could with his hands bound behind him. He refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing him falter. Inside, the station buzzed with activity. Phones rang incessantly, officers shuffled papers, and the hum of fluorescent lights created an oppressive atmosphere. Dunham led Marcus to a desk, where a bored-looking desk sergeant barely glanced up from his computer. "Got ourselves a big fish tonight," Dunham announced, his voice dripping with mockery. "Caught him with enough powder to sink a ship." The sergeant raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Name?" he asked, his fingers poised over the keyboard. "Marcus Daniels," Marcus replied evenly, his voice cutting through the room with quiet authority. For the first time, the sergeant looked up, his eyes narrowing as recognition dawned. "Wait, the Marcus Daniels?" he asked, his tone shifting slightly. Dunham's smirk faltered for a moment before he recovered. "Yeah, so what?" Dunham snapped. "Doesn't matter who he is. Evidence speaks for itself." The sergeant's hesitation was brief, but Marcus didn't miss it. He filed it away, a small crack in the armor of their facade. As Dunham and Rhodes led him to a holding cell, Marcus couldn't help but notice the uneasy glances exchanged between some of the younger officers. They knew who he was, and they knew what his reputation meant. Marcus Daniels wasn't just a lawyer, he was a crusader for justice, and his presence here would not go unnoticed. The cell door clanged shut behind him, the sound echoing through the empty corridor. Marcus sat down on the cold metal bench, his mind already racing. He knew his team would be looking for him, they always kept tabs on his whereabouts, especially with a case as high profile as the one they were currently working on. All he had to do was wait. But Marcus was not a man who liked to waste time. Pulling himself to his full height, he stepped toward the bars and looked down the corridor. "Officer," he called, his voice calm but commanding. A young officer, barely out of his 20s, appeared at the far end, his expression wary. "What do you want?" the officer asked, his voice uncertain. "I'd like to make my phone call," Marcus said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The officer hesitated but eventually nodded, unlocking the cell and leading Marcus to a phone mounted on the wall. Marcus dialed a number from memory, and it rang only once before a familiar voice answered. "Daniels," came the voice of Olivia Grant, his second-in-command and the sharpest legal mind he had ever worked with. "Olivia, it's me," Marcus said, keeping his voice low. "I'm at the 14th precinct. They planted evidence. I need you to mobilize the team. Start digging into Officers Dunham and Rhodes. I want every complaint, every questionable arrest, every shred of misconduct." Olivia didn't miss a beat. "Already on it," she replied. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Marcus assured her. "But this isn't just about me. We need to expose the system that lets this happen." "Understood," Olivia said. "We'll have you out by morning." Marcus hung up the phone and allowed himself a small sigh of relief. He knew his team would leave no stone unturned. He had handpicked each member not just for their legal acumen but for their unwavering commitment to justice. If anyone could turn the tables, it was them. As he was led back to his cell, Marcus's thoughts turned to the broader implications of his situation. This wasn't just about two corrupt cops trying to frame a black man, it was about a system that enabled and encouraged such behavior. He thought of the countless men and women who didn't have the resources or knowledge to fight back, whose lives had been destroyed by the same abuse of power he was now facing. Back in his cell, Marcus sat on the bench and closed his eyes, replaying every moment of the arrest in his mind. He dissected their actions, their words, their body language, searching for weaknesses. He had spent years in courtrooms doing the same thing, breaking down witnesses and building airtight cases. This time, the stakes were personal. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit office within the precinct, Dunham and Rhodes celebrated their supposed victory. "Can you believe the nerve of that guy?" Rhodes said, leaning back in his chair. "Acting like he's untouchable." Dunham chuckled, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "Doesn't matter who he is. We've got the evidence. It's an open and shut case." But beneath their bravado, there was a flicker of unease. They had heard the whispers about Marcus Daniels, about the cases he had won and the powerful people he had taken down. They dismissed it as paranoia, but the seed of doubt had been planted. By the time the sun rose, the wheels of justice had already begun to turn. Olivia and the rest of the legal team worked through the night, gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and uncovering a pattern of misconduct that painted a damning picture of Dunham and Rhodes. Their arrogance had blinded them to the fact that they were up against a man who thrived in the face of adversity. In his cell, Marcus stood by the bars, his eyes steady and his resolve unshaken. He knew the battle ahead would be difficult, but he also knew that he was not alone. This wasn't just about clearing his name, it was about shining a light on a system that thrived in darkness. And Marcus Daniels was ready to fight. The awakening storm. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the dusty windows of the precinct, casting faint shadows across the room where Marcus Daniels sat quietly in his cell. To an untrained observer, he might have looked defeated. His tailored navy suit, now slightly wrinkled, hung loosely on his frame as he sat on the cold metal bench. But his mind was a storm of calculation and resolve. Defeat was the last thing on his mind. Across town, Olivia Grant's office was a flurry of activity. The conference table that usually hosted high-profile meetings was now buried under piles of documents, case files, and laptops. A dozen team members worked furiously, each assigned a specific task. Olivia stood at the center, her sharp eyes scanning over the board where they had begun mapping out the case against officers Dunham and Rhodes. "Look here," Olivia said, pointing to a list of names pinned to the board. 6 complaints of excessive force against Dunham in the last 2 years, 4 of which were mysteriously dismissed before making it to review. She turned to one of the younger associates. "Find out who signed off on those dismissals. I want their names and any records of correspondence." The associate nodded and quickly got to work. Another team member, a data analyst named Victor, chimed in. "I've traced the serial number on the plastic bag they supposedly found in Marcus's car. It's part of evidence from a drug bust 6 months ago, a case Dunham was involved in. The bag was supposed to be in storage." Olivia's lips tightened into a grim line. "Good. Cross-reference that with any other cases where evidence has gone missing or been mishandled. If they've done this once, they've done it before." The team worked tirelessly, fueled by coffee in a shared sense of outrage. Each piece of evidence they uncovered painted a clearer picture of corruption, a pattern of abuse that went far beyond Marcus Daniels. Olivia knew that their work would be the foundation of not just a defense, but a counteroffensive that would shake the precinct to its core. Back at the station, Marcus was beginning to attract attention. Officers passed his cell with guarded curiosity, some pretending not to recognize him, others openly staring. News of his arrest had started to spread, and with it, the weight of what his presence represented. Marcus Daniels wasn't just another suspect. He was a man with connections, resources, and an unblemished reputation for taking down powerful adversaries. Dunham and Rhodes, however, remained oblivious to the storm brewing outside. Confident in their fabricated evidence, they strutted through the precinct with an air of arrogance. Rhodes stopped by Marcus's cell, leaning casually against the bars. "How's it feel, counselor?" Rhodes sneered. "Bet you're wishing you'd stayed in your fancy office instead of playing hero." Marcus looked up at him, his expression calm and unreadable. "I'm just wondering how long it'll take before you realize you've made the biggest mistake of your career." Rhodes' smirk faltered, but he quickly recovered, laughing as he walked away. Marcus watched him go, his mind already envisioning the moment when Rhodes' bravado would crumble under the weight of undeniable truth. By mid-morning, Olivia's team had uncovered enough evidence to mount a formidable case. They had unearthed a history of complaints against both Dunham and Rhodes, patterns of missing evidence, and even internal memos suggesting that higher-ups in the precinct had knowingly covered for their misconduct. Olivia made the decision to escalate. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she rarely used. It belonged to Jacob Myers, an investigative journalist known for his hard-hitting exposés on corruption. If anyone could bring public pressure to bear, it was Jacob. "Olivia," Jacob answered, his voice brisk. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I have a story for you," Olivia said without preamble. "A powerful one. Corruption in the 14th precinct. Evidence tampering, false arrests, racial profiling, and it just so happens that they've targeted Marcus Daniels." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Jacob's voice came through, sharper now. "Marcus Daniels. As in the Marcus Daniels?" "The very same," Olivia confirmed. "I'm sending over files. You'll have everything you need to verify. I want this story out within the hour." "Consider it done," Jacob replied. "And Olivia, this is going to blow up." "That's the idea," she said before hanging up. At the same time, Marcus's legal team filed an emergency motion to have him released on bail. Within hours, the motion was granted, and Marcus was escorted out of his cell. As he stepped into the station's lobby, he was met with the sight of Olivia and several other members of his team waiting for him, their expressions a mix of relief and determination. "Welcome back, boss," Olivia said, handing him a fresh suit from a garment bag she'd brought. Marcus changed quickly in a nearby restroom, emerging minutes later looking every bit the formidable lawyer he was. The precinct's officers watched uneasily as he walked out the front doors with his team, their whispers trailing behind him. Outside, a group of reporters had already gathered, their cameras flashing as Marcus stepped into the sunlight. Olivia had expected this and had prepared a brief statement. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice steady and resolute. "Last night, I was the victim of a false arrest orchestrated by officers who have betrayed the oath they swore to uphold. But this is not just about me. This is about a system that allows corruption to thrive unchecked. My team and I are committed to ensuring that justice is served, not just for myself, but for every individual who has been wronged by this broken system. We will not be silent." The crowd erupted with questions, but Marcus and Olivia moved quickly to their waiting car. As they drove away, Marcus turned to her. "They'll come after us," he said. "Let them," Olivia replied, a fierce glint in her eyes. "We're ready." Back at the firm, the team began preparing for the legal battle ahead. But they knew this wouldn't just be fought in court. The fight for justice would require them to win in the court of public opinion as well. With the media now involved and their evidence mounting, the tides were beginning to turn. What Dunham and Rhodes had started as a routine abuse of power was about to unravel their careers and expose a web of corruption far greater than they could have imagined. And Marcus Daniels, the man they had underestimated, was about to lead the charge. Cracks in the foundation. The air in the precinct grew heavier as the morning unfolded. By now, the officers who had once greeted Dunham and Rhodes with camaraderie were avoiding their gaze. Whispers filled the corners of the station, fueled by the sudden media frenzy surrounding Marcus Daniels' arrest. News outlets had picked up Jacob Meyer's exposé within an hour of its publication. It was scathing, to say the least. The article detailed not only Marcus's false arrest but also the troubling history of complaints against Dunham and Rhodes. It named victims, cited statistics, and included leaked internal memos that painted a damning picture of the precinct's systemic failures. The station phone lines were flooded with inquiries, and even the police chief had been summoned to an emergency meeting with the mayor. The once confident officers now found themselves under a microscope. Dunham's office was eerily quiet. He sat at his desk, scrolling through his phone, his face pale as he read the article for the third time. Rhodes paced the room, his earlier bravado replaced by nervous energy. "This is bad," Rhodes muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "Really bad. They've got everything, names, dates, even evidence logs." "It's a smear campaign," Dunham snapped, though his voice lacked conviction. "We'll ride it out. They don't have anything solid." Rhodes stopped pacing and looked at him, his expression grim. "You sure about that? Because it sounds like they do. And if they keep digging," he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Dunham leaned back in his chair, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. For years, he had operated with impunity, confident that the system would protect him. But now, for the first time, he felt the walls closing in. Meanwhile, at Marcus's law firm, the team was shifting into high gear. The boardroom had been transformed into a war room, with Olivia Grant at the helm. The walls were lined with whiteboards covered in notes, timelines, and photographs. Each member of the team had a specific role, from compiling evidence to coordinating with the media. "We need to move fast," Olivia said, addressing the team. "The article has put them on the defensive, but we can't let up. They're going to try to discredit Marcus, maybe even go after us. Be prepared for anything." Victor, the data analyst, raised his hand. "I've been cross-referencing Dunham's financials with the precinct's budget reports. There are some irregularities." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Define irregularities." "Payments that don't add up," Victor explained. Overtime hours that don't match shift logs, unexplained bonuses. It's subtle, but it's there. Olivia nodded. Good work. Keep digging. If there's a financial trail, we need to follow it. Another associate spoke up. I've been reaching out to some of the victims mentioned in the article. Most are hesitant to talk, but a few are willing to go on record. If we can get their testimonies, it'll add weight to our case. Make it happen, Olivia said. Every voice matters. And keep the focus on the systemic issues. This isn't just about Dunham and Rhodes, it's about the culture that allowed them to operate like this. As the team dispersed to continue their work, Olivia sat back in her chair, allowing herself a moment to reflect. She had worked with Marcus for years and had always admired his resilience. But this was personal. The stakes were higher than ever, and failure was not an option. At the precinct, the pressure was mounting. The police chief had returned from his meeting with the mayor, and his mood was dark. He summoned Dunham and Rhodes to his office, slamming the door behind them. "What the hell were you thinking?" the chief demanded, his voice low but seething. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "With all due respect, Chief," Dunham began, but the chief cut him off. "Save it," he snapped. "This isn't just about you anymore. This precinct is under scrutiny, and if this blows up any further, it's not just your careers on the line, it's mine." Rhodes shifted uncomfortably. "We didn't think it would go this far," he admitted. "It was supposed to be simple." "Well, it's not," the chief said. "And now we're all in damage control mode. I want everything on Daniels wiped clean. The charges, the evidence, all of it. And pray to God he doesn't come after us." Dunham's jaw tightened. "You're just going to let him walk?" The chief glared at him. "Do you have a better idea? Because unless you've got something that can make this go away, Daniels has us by the throat." For the first time, Dunham was silent. He had no answer. Later that afternoon, Marcus and Olivia sat in his office, reviewing the latest updates from their team. The tide was turning, but Marcus knew better than to celebrate prematurely. "They'll try to bury this," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Drop the charges, offer a settlement, anything to make it go away quietly." "And we won't let them," Olivia replied. "This isn't just about you, Marcus. It's about every person they've wronged, every life they've ruined. We have to see this through." Marcus nodded, his expression resolute. "Then we keep pushing. No deals, no compromises. If they want a fight, we'll give them one." The two shared a moment of understanding. This was more than a legal battle, it was a fight for justice, for accountability, for change. And neither of them would back down. By evening, the cracks in the foundation had grown wider. Dunham and Rhodes were no longer untouchable, and the system they had relied on to protect them was beginning to crumble. But Marcus and his team knew that this was just the beginning. The real battle was yet to come, and they were ready to face it head-on. The counterattack. The quiet hum of anticipation filled the offices of Marcus Daniels' law firm as the team prepared for the next phase of their battle. While the media storm raged outside, inside the building, a meticulous plan was being crafted. Olivia Grant stood at the head of the conference table, addressing the team with the kind of precision Marcus had come to admire. "We've got them on the ropes," Olivia began, her voice steady. "But this isn't just about tearing down two crooked cops. This is about exposing a system that's let them thrive for years. Our case can't just be airtight, it has to be unassailable." She turned to Victor, the team's data analyst. "Where are we on the financial irregularities?" Victor pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose and nodded. "We've identified several suspicious transactions tied to Dunham's account. It looks like he's been skimming funds from evidence seizures and padding his overtime reports. Rhodes is in on it too, we found payments made to a shell company he's linked to." "Good," Olivia said, her eyes narrowing. "We'll use that to show a pattern of corruption." What about the complaints against them? One of the junior associates, a sharp-witted young woman named Carla, spoke up. We've reached out to 10 individuals who filed complaints. 7 are willing to testify. Their stories are consistent: fabricated evidence, excessive force, racial profiling. Dunham and Rhodes have been getting away with this for years. Marcus, who had been silently listening, finally spoke. We need to protect those witnesses. Once this goes public, Dunham and Rhodes will do everything they can to intimidate or discredit them. Already handled, Olivia said with a nod. We've arranged for secure locations and ensured they have legal representation. They'll be safe. Satisfied, Marcus leaned back in his chair. Then it's time to move forward. Schedule the press conference. The public needs to see the faces of the people these officers have victimized. Meanwhile, at the precinct, Dunham and Rhodes were beginning to feel the walls close in. The police chief's earlier warning had done little to ease their anxiety, and the news that 7 former complainants were preparing to testify against them had sent them into a spiral. This is getting out of hand, Rhodes said, pacing the small office they shared. If those people testify, we're done. They'll crucify us. Dunham scowled, his jaw clenched. Not if we get ahead of it. We need to discredit Daniels and anyone who's backing him. Make them look like opportunists. How? Rhodes demanded. The guy's spotless. He's a freaking legal legend. Anything we try will blow back on us. Dunham didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared at the framed commendations on his desk, reminders of the career he had carefully crafted over the years. Finally, he spoke. We dig deeper. Everyone has skeletons. If we can't find any on Daniels, we'll go after his team. Someone has to have something we can use. Rhodes hesitated but eventually nodded. It was a desperate move, but desperation was all they had left. The press conference was held in the firm's atrium, a grand space with high ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows that let in the afternoon sun. Reporters from major news outlets filled the room, cameras and microphones poised to capture every word. Marcus stood at the podium, flanked by Olivia and several members of his team. Behind them, a large screen displayed the faces of the 7 individuals who had come forward to share their stories. Thank you all for being here, Marcus began, his voice steady and resonant. Last week, I was falsely arrested by Officers Dunham and Rhodes of the 14th Precinct. They planted evidence in an attempt to frame me for a crime I did not commit. But this is not just about me. It's about the countless others who have suffered under the same corrupt practices. He gestured to the screen behind him. These are the faces of just a few of those individuals. Their stories are harrowing, and their courage in coming forward cannot be overstated. They trusted the system to protect them, and instead, it failed them. But today, we begin the process of setting things right. As Marcus spoke, Olivia watched the reporters carefully, noting their reactions. She could see the impact of his words, the way the gravity of the situation was sinking in. When Marcus finished, the room erupted in questions, but he remained composed, answering each one with the poise of a seasoned litigator. Back at the precinct, Dunham and Rhodes watched the press conference from a small TV in the break room. As Marcus's words filled the room, the tension between them was palpable. This isn't just a fight anymore, Rhodes said, his voice low. It's a war. And we're losing. Dunham didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared at the screen, his expression dark. Finally, he muttered, not yet, we're not. But even as he spoke, doubt crept into his voice. He could see the tide turning, and for the first time, he realized that their usual tactics might not be enough to save them. The press conference was just the beginning. Over the next 48 hours, Olivia's team launched a full-scale media campaign, releasing carefully curated evidence to the press and coordinating interviews with the 7 complainants. The narrative was clear: this wasn't just about 2 bad cops, it was about a broken system that needed to be fixed. Public opinion began to shift rapidly. Social media erupted with calls for accountability, and protests were organized outside the precinct. Even the mayor, who had initially tried to stay out of the fray, issued a statement condemning police misconduct and calling for a full investigation. Within the precinct, the atmosphere was tense. Officers who had once turned a blind eye to Dunham and Rhodes' actions now avoided them entirely. The two men found themselves increasingly isolated, their support network crumbling under the weight of public scrutiny. Late one evening, as the city buzzed with the growing momentum of the case, Marcus sat in his office, reviewing the latest developments. Olivia entered, a satisfied smile on her face. "We just got word from the DA's office," she said. "They're opening a formal investigation into the 14th precinct. Dunham and Rhodes are officially under review." Marcus nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "It's a start," he said. "But we're not done yet. Not until every victim gets the justice they deserve." Olivia nodded. "We'll get there, Marcus. One step at a time." As she left, Marcus leaned back in his chair, his mind already turning to the next phase of the fight. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, he felt the faint stirrings of victory. The tide was turning, and there was no going back now. The fall of the corrupt. The city was alive with tension. The protests outside the 14th precinct had swelled into the hundreds, a growing crowd of citizens demanding accountability. Signs emblazoned with phrases like, "Justice for all," "End police corruption," and "No more lies," waved in the air, a visual testament to the power of Marcus Daniels' fight. The precinct, once a symbol of authority, now stood as a monument to its own unraveling. Inside the law firm, Marcus and Olivia were putting the finishing touches on their legal case. The air in the room was electric with a mix of exhaustion and determination. Every piece of evidence, every testimony, and every document was meticulously arranged into a narrative that left no room for doubt. This was more than a defense, it was an indictment of a broken system. "The DA's office has agreed to meet with us tomorrow," Olivia said, handing Marcus a file. "They're under pressure from the public, and they're listening. If we present this right, we can push for immediate action." Marcus nodded, his jaw set with resolve. They won't have a choice. The evidence is too overwhelming. The team worked late into the night, fine-tuning their strategy. Each document was a weapon, each testimony a shield. By the time the city slept, Marcus and Olivia had crafted a case so precise it felt like a scalpel cutting through the layers of deceit. At the precinct, Dunham and Rhodes sat in the break room, the weight of their impending downfall hanging heavy in the air. The usual camaraderie of their colleagues had turned to icy indifference. Even the chief, once their staunch ally, had begun distancing himself. The writing was on the wall, and they both knew it. "We're not going to make it through this," Rhodes said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. He stared at the untouched coffee in his hands, his bravado from earlier in the week completely gone. "Stop talking like that," Dunham snapped, though his voice lacked its usual bite. "We just need to hold out until this blows over." Rhodes shook his head. "It's not blowing over, Dunham. It's getting worse. The DA's office is involved now. They're digging through everything." Dunham didn't reply. For the first time, he couldn't muster the confidence to argue. Deep down, he knew Rhodes was right. The next morning, the meeting with the district attorney's office took place in a grand conference room lined with mahogany furniture and imposing bookcases. Marcus and Olivia sat across from the DA, a no-nonsense woman named Eleanor Price, who was known for her uncompromising stance on justice. "Mr. Daniels," Eleanor began, folding her hands on the table. "I've reviewed the materials you sent over, and I have to admit, it's damning. But I need to know one thing, what is your ultimate goal here?" Marcus met her gaze steadily. "Justice. Not just for me, but for everyone who's been victimized by Dunham, Rhodes, and the culture they've been allowed to thrive in. We're not looking for a settlement or a slap on the wrist. We want accountability, and we want change. Eleanor nodded slowly. You've built a solid case. We'll move forward with charges against the officers, but I'll be honest with you, this isn't just about them. This is about the entire precinct, maybe even beyond that. Are you ready for what's coming? Marcus leaned forward. I've been ready for this my entire career. The DA's office wasted no time. By the afternoon, formal charges were announced against officers Dunham and Rhodes, including falsifying evidence, obstruction of justice, and misconduct. The announcement sent shockwaves through the city. The press conference held by the DA's office was broadcast live, and as Eleanor Price detailed the charges, the crowd outside the precinct erupted in cheers. Dunham and Rhodes were summoned to the chief's office that evening. The mood was grim. The chief's expression was unreadable as he handed them their suspension notices. You're both done, he said bluntly. Turn in your badges and guns. IA will be in touch for further questioning. Rhodes looked like he might cry, while Dunham's face hardened with anger. This isn't over, Dunham muttered, glaring at the chief. Yes, it is, the chief replied. You brought this on yourselves. Now get out of my sight. Back at the law firm, Marcus and his team celebrated the victory, though they knew the fight was far from over. The charges against Dunham and Rhodes were just the beginning. The DA's investigation had expanded to include other officers and even the precinct leadership. The web of corruption was larger than anyone had anticipated. As the team toasted with glasses of sparkling water, Marcus took a moment to reflect. The road ahead would be long and arduous, but for the first time in a while, he felt hope. The system wasn't perfect, but it could be held accountable. Change was possible. Olivia raised her glass. To justice, she said, her voice filled with conviction. To justice, Marcus echoed, a small smile on his face. But in his heart, he knew this was just one battle in a much larger war. The aftermath of the charges against Dunham and Rhodes rippled through the city. The protests outside the precinct became celebrations, but they also served as a reminder that vigilance was necessary to prevent future abuses. Marcus's case became a national story, a symbol of the power of resilience and the importance of fighting for what was right. For Marcus, the journey was far from over. There were more battles to fight, more injustices to confront. But as he stood on the steps of the courthouse, surrounded by supporters and reporters, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This isn't just about me, he said, addressing the crowd. This is about all of us. Together, we can create a system that serves justice for everyone, not just the privileged few. This is our fight, and we will not stop until it is won. The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing through the city streets. And as Marcus looked out at the sea of faces, he knew that he was not alone in this fight. Together, they would forge a better future.